He survived 3 years alone on a planet where predators hunt in perpetual twilight. His only rule, trust no one. Then he found the child in the cave, abandoned, wounded, and speaking a language he barely understood. Helping her meant breaking every survival instinct he'd forged, but what he didn't know was that her presence wasn't an accident. It was a test that would redefine leadership for an entire civilization. The blue-green canopy never let full light through, only scattered patches that shifted with the twin moons. Ethan woke well before what passed for dawn on this world, his movement slow and deliberate against the damp rock. He knew the cost of haste here. Every breath, every step had to be measured. The rock shadows hunted by vibration, sensing prey through the limestone formations and dense soil. He'd seen them take a 6-legged grazer from 50 yards away, emerging silent and swift from what seemed like solid stone. Their exoskeletons clicked like knives scraping together when they moved in numbers. He'd learned to move like the wind flows, steady, constant, but leaving no lasting trace. His shelters weren't built so much as grown, woven from flexwood and camouflaged with local mosses. They blended into the forest so completely that even he sometimes had to check his own markers to find them at day's end. The spear in his hand felt like part of his arm now. He'd carved it from alien obsidian that fractured sharper than any terrestrial glass. The dagger at his belt had taken 3 weeks to shape and polish, its edge tested on everything from tough hide to sinew. He kept both weapons clean, their surfaces dulled to avoid catching light. Survival here meant rewriting human instinct daily. Where Earth logic said run, this world said freeze. Where panic said fight, experience said retreat. He'd unlearned the urge to shout, to pound surfaces, to leave obvious trails. The forest's rhythms became his only language. The way certain birds fell silent before an attack. How the lichen grew thicker near water sources. For 3 years, the dangers taught him everything. They showed him which fungi could kill with a touch, which streams ran clear and which carried parasites. They taught him that fire attracted more than it deterred, that silence protected better than any weapon. Solitude forged a man who trusted nothing but his own hands, his own eyes, his own hardened judgment. The rock shadows were always there, just beyond the edge of perception. 6-legged and armored, they moved through stone as if it were water, their sensory pits detecting the slightest tremor. They'd taken members of his crash crew one by one in those first terrible months. Now they were just another part of the landscape, another variable in the endless equation of survival. He checked his traps at midday. One held a struggling rock shadow, its claws scraping against the reinforced fibers. The sound was too loud, too sharp. He moved toward the limestone formation where the echo seemed distorted, spear ready. Then he found the cave. A faint sound echoed from deep within the limestone formation, softer than the rock shadow's struggles but more deliberate. Ethan's trap had caught one of the predators, its armored legs thrashing against the reinforced fibers. The noise would draw others soon, but there was another sound, a shallow, rapid breathing that didn't belong to any creature he knew. Investigating meant exposure. The cave mouth offered some cover, but entering deep enough to find the source would mean losing sight of the forest. He could already sense the vibration of other rock shadows moving toward the trapped one's distress calls. His hand tightened on the obsidian spear. He moved into the cave without breathing, each step placed toe first, then heel. The limestone absorbed sound well, but his own heartbeat seemed loud in the confined space. Stalactites dripped mineral-rich water into shallow pools, their rhythm masking his movement. His eyes adjusted to the deeper gloom, picking out shapes in the blue-tinted darkness. The child was curled behind a flowstone formation, knees drawn to chest. Her blue skin looked pale in the dim light, almost translucent. She wore simple hide wrappings and carried a small pack of supplies now nearly empty. One hand gripped a crude knife carved from the same black stone as his own weapons. Her large black eyes caught what little light filtered through the cave opening. They showed fear, the sharp animal fear of something cornered. But beneath that ran a thread of defiance, a readiness to fight even in retreat. She looked like she'd been there for days, maybe longer. She spoke words in a low, tight voice. The dialect was Nar, one of the tribal languages he'd heard fragments of during his first year. He caught the word for danger, the term for outsider, something that might have meant hunter or maybe warrior. Her tone wasn't pleading, but warning, as if telling him to leave. Every survival instinct told him to turn back. Another mouth to feed meant less water, less food, greater risk of detection. She might attract predators, slow him down, force compromises in his carefully maintained routines. 3 years of isolation had taught him that dependency got people killed, but her eyes held something he hadn't encountered since the crash. Not just fear or defiance, but recognition. She looked at him not as predator or prey, but as another thinking being. That connection tugged at something deeper than survival calculus, something he'd buried along with his dead crewmates. He kept his spear lowered but ready, making no sudden moves. The rock shadow outside continued its struggles, but the sound seemed more distant now. The cave felt like a separate world, insulated from the perpetual threat outside. Her gaze didn't waver, watching him with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. Then she shifted position slightly, and he saw the swollen ankle, the way she favored one leg even while crouching. The injury looked recent but serious, already discolored beneath the blue skin tone. She hadn't mentioned it, hadn't shown any sign of pain beyond the tension in her posture. He made a decision then, one that went against every hard lesson the forest had taught him. He took a half step back, creating space, and slowly sat on a rock formation several feet away. He kept his hands visible, his movements deliberate. The spear he laid across his knees, not sheathed but not threatening either. She watched him, her own knife still held ready but no longer poised to strike. The standoff stretched into minutes, broken only by the drip of water and the fading struggles from outside. Then she spoke again, a single word this time, one he recognized from early encounters with Nar hunters. It meant roughly, why. She called it the trial, with a reverence that chilled him. The term carried weight, significance beyond the simple syllables. She explained between careful bites of the nutrient bar he'd offered, her eyes never leaving his face. The food was foreign to her, but she ate it without question, recognizing the gesture for what it was. Her presence in the cave wasn't accident, but ritual. The Nar people conducted this test every third alignment of the twin moons. Children of leadership age were taken deep into the forest and left with minimal supplies. They either survived the duration and returned to the village, or they perished and became warnings for future generations. Only the strongest could lead, and strength meant surviving alone against the forest's deadliest threats. She had been out here 3 days already. Most candidates failed within the first 48 hours, falling to rock shadows or exposure or simple disorientation. Her swollen ankle had come from a fall during the first night, when she'd tried to climb to higher ground for safety. The injury had trapped her in this cave system, unable to move toward the village or properly hunt for food. Her supplies consisted of a water skin, now nearly empty, and a few strips of dried meat that wouldn't last another day. Yet she spoke of the trial with pride, with absolute certainty in its necessity. This was how her people had always chosen leaders, how they maintained strength in a hostile world. To question the process was to question their entire culture's survival strategy. Ethan listened without interrupting, his own survival instincts warring with something deeper. He'd spent 3 years unlearning human dependencies, forging himself into a creature of pure pragmatism. Cooperation meant vulnerability, attachment meant weakness, compassion got you killed. These were the lessons the forest had carved into his bones. Her beliefs represented everything he'd been forced to abandon. Where she saw strength in enduring alone, he saw wasted potential. Where she saw a necessary test, he saw preventable suffering. The cultural divide felt vast, unbridgeable. He remembered his own crew's first months here, how they died one by one because they hadn't adapted quickly enough to the planet's realities. She finished the nutrient bar and carefully folded the wrapper, handing it back to him as if it were valuable. Her movements were precise despite the pain in her ankle. She had the focused intensity of someone who expected to lead, who had been prepared for this test since childhood. The forest was supposed to be her proving ground, not her tomb. He looked at her not as a candidate for leadership, not as a symbol of some alien tradition, but as a wounded child who needed help. The realization settled in his chest with a weight that felt familiar, like the decision to check a fallen crewmate's pulse even when you knew they were gone. Some instincts refused to be fully erased, no matter how many times the world punished you for them. The rock shadows outside had gone quiet, either having taken their trapped companion or moved on to other hunting grounds. The cave felt insulated from the forest's constant threats, a temporary sanctuary where different rules might apply. He watched her test her weight on the injured ankle, her expression tight with controlled pain. He made his decision based on nothing logical, nothing that would appear in any survival manual. The trial would continue, but not as her people had intended. Not as he would have preferred either. Sometimes adaptation meant recognizing when the old rules no longer served. When strength took forms beyond mere endurance, every instinct told him to maintain distance, to follow the primary law of survival he'd carved into his bones over 3 years. Isolation demanded self-preservation above all else. Every shared resource meant less for himself. Every extra sound attracted predators. Every additional presence created vulnerability. His mind calculated the risks in cold, practical terms even as his hands moved against their training. He gave her water from his limited supply, watching her drink with the careful economy of someone who knew its value. The water skin had taken him 2 days to prepare from a membrane-like plant he'd found near the northern ridges. He offered protein from his carefully stored cache, dried meat from a 6-legged grazer he'd hunted 3 days earlier. Each strip represented hours of tracking, killing, and preserving. She accepted without the gratitude he might have expected from a human, but with a measuring look that acknowledged the sacrifice. Teaching her basic shelter-building techniques felt like revealing military secrets to a potential enemy. He showed her how to weave flexwood into structures that bent with the wind rather than resisting it. Demonstrated the layered moss insulation that kept heat contained without visible smoke. Explained how to orient openings away from prevailing winds yet toward escape routes. Each technique had been earned through failure, through near-fatal errors in his first year. Sharing them risked making his hard-won knowledge common. The rock shadows hunted better in groups, coordinating attacks through vibrations in the stone. He'd seen them flank prey, drive targets into ambushes, and share kills according to some unseen hierarchy. The realization settled in his mind like a stone dropping into deep water. Humans also hunted better in groups, built better, survived better. His 3 years of solitude had been necessary adaptation, not ideal existence. The admission felt like unlocking a door he'd welded shut long ago. His pragmatic humanity clashed with her culture's brutal efficiency. Where she saw strength and endurance, he saw wisdom and prevention. Where she valued silent suffering, he valued practical solutions. The conflict played out in small moments. Her reluctance to accept pain relief herbs, her insistence on walking despite the injury, her belief that asking for help weakened a leader's standing. He found himself explaining concepts that felt fundamental. Concepts like preventative care and resource management and tactical retreat. She watched him with curious eyes, learning human ways alongside survival skills. Her questions were sharp, perceptive. Why elevate shelters rather than building into hillsides? Why boil water when fresh streams ran clear? Why conserve energy through stillness rather than constantly testing strength? Each answer required him to articulate knowledge he'd gained through instinct and repetition. The teaching solidified his own understanding even as it risked his methods. Then he saw her injured ankle again as she tried to stand, the purple-black swelling that had spread up her calf. The joint twisted at an angle that promised permanent damage if not treated. The sight broke another rule, one deeper than resource management or tactical secrecy. He moved toward her without deciding to, his hands already reaching for the medical pack he carried despite its dwindling supplies. The decision felt less like choice and more like gravity, something inevitable once the conditions were met. The swelling had turned her ankle a dark purple blue. The skin stretched tight over the inflamed joint. She insisted on walking despite the obvious damage, putting weight on it with a stiffness that spoke of pure will overriding physical reality. Each step made her breath catch, though she refused to vocalize the pain. Her people's tradition valued endurance above all, viewing pain as something to be conquered through mental strength, rather than treated through practical means. Ethan worked without asking permission. He selected 2 straight flexwood branches and began carving them into splints with his obsidian blade. The fibers came from a tough vine he kept coiled in his pack, strong enough to bind shelter frames but flexible enough for this purpose. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, though never for an alien physiology. The anatomy was close enough to human, joint, ligaments, bone structure, that the principles still applied. He explained compression techniques as he worked, wrapping the fibers in specific patterns to stabilize without cutting off circulation. She watched with skeptical eyes, her body tense with resistance. The concept of external support conflicted with everything she'd been taught about self-reliance. Her people believed accepting help showed weakness, that true leaders endured hardship without assistance. The splints represented a foreign philosophy, one that prioritized results over pride. Strength isn't everything, he told her as he tightened the final knot. Sometimes the smartest survive. The words hung in the air between them, simple but laden with implications. He cited examples from his own experience. Times when retreating from a fight had saved his life. When conserving energy had proven more valuable than demonstrating strength. When asking for help might have saved crewmates who died in isolation. The lessons felt bitter in his mouth, tasted like failure even as he spoke them. She resisted at first, her hands moving to remove the binding. The action was instinctive, born of cultural training deeper than conscious thought. He didn't stop her, just waited while she tested the freedom of movement. The swelling had already begun to recede slightly from the compression, the purple hue fading at the edges, the pain visibly lessened as the joint stabilized. Though she wouldn't acknowledge it aloud, her expression remained guarded, but the tension around her eyes eased. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the drip of water from limestone formations. She flexed the immobilized ankle experimentally, testing the range of motion. The improvement was undeniable, the relief physical despite her cultural resistance. Ethan busied himself with repacking his medical supplies, giving her space to process the contradiction between what she felt and what she believed. Sometimes adaptation happened in small moments, in quiet acceptances. Finally she stood, putting weight on the splinted ankle with deliberate care. The support held, distributing pressure away from the injured joint. She took a tentative step, then another, her movements still careful but no longer pained. The skepticism in her eyes gave way to calculation, to reassessment. She looked at the splints not as a mark of weakness but as a tool, another form of strength she hadn't considered before. They began moving toward her village, two different worlds walking together. Her pace was slower than his normal travel speed, but steady, sustainable. The splints allowed movement without aggravating the injury, buying time for natural healing. He adjusted his stride to match hers, his senses scanning the forest for threats she might miss while distracted by pain. The partnership felt fragile, temporary, but functional. They moved through the blue-green twilight as the twin moons began their ascent, the forest's rhythms continuing around them unchanged by the small rebellion taking place within it. The forest seemed different with company. The constant rustle of flexwood leaves and distant clicks of rock shadows no longer signaled pure threat, but shared awareness. Their progress remained slow but steady, following her directions toward the village. She knew the way by landmark and instinct, reading the forest with a native's understanding he'd never fully acquire. Each step took them deeper into territory he usually avoided, closer to the heart of Nar civilization. Every noise demanded assessment. A falling branch might be natural decay or a predator testing footing. Distant vibrations could be hunting rock shadows or other trial participants moving through the limestone formations. Ethan kept his spear ready, his eyes scanning the blue-green canopy for movement. She moved beside him with renewed confidence, the splints allowing progress without aggravating her injury. Their pace felt dangerously exposed compared to his normal stealth, but necessary for her mobility. He taught her human tracking methods between cautious advances, showed her how to read subtle disturbances in the moss patterns, how to identify recent passages by the angle of broken twigs, how to distinguish between predator and prey movements by vibration intensity. She shared Nar pathfinding techniques in return, how certain lichen growth indicated water sources, how rock formations aligned with seasonal star patterns, how to navigate by the faint magnetic fields that pulsed through the planet's crust. The exchange felt like unlocking two different languages for the same world. They moved through the canopy when possible, using the interwoven flexwood branches as natural pathways. The elevated roots avoided most rock shadow territories, the predators preferring ground-level hunting where their vibration sensing worked best. He demonstrated how to test branch strength before committing weight, how to use vine ropes for safety lines, how to move with minimal sway that might attract flying predators. She adapted quickly, her natural agility compensating for the injured ankle. Her improved mobility proved the value of his methods. The skepticism in her eyes gave way to practical acceptance as the kilometers passed without increased pain. She began asking questions about Earth during rest periods, her curiosity cutting through the survival focus. Wanted to know how humans chose leaders, how they trained their young, how they faced threats without trial by abandonment. Her questions revealed a mind accustomed to command, to thinking in systems rather than individual survival. He spoke of cooperation more than strength, of knowledge sharing more than secrecy. Explained how human societies built institutions that outlasted individuals, how specialization allowed deeper expertise, how written records preserved lessons across generations. The concepts felt foreign on this world where survival often meant solitary endurance. She listened without immediate judgment, turning each idea over like a strange fruit, examining it from all angles before accepting or setting it aside. The cultural contamination was already happening, subtle but irreversible. Each shared technique, each exchanged idea, represented a breach in the trial's isolation principle. He knew enough of rigid traditions to understand the consequences. Elders would see not adaptation but corruption, not innovation but violation. The forest itself seemed to watch their progress, the twin moons casting overlapping shadows that felt like disapproving eyes. Then a figure emerged from behind a granite outcrop, lean and moving with aggressive confidence. The Narboy carried a spear notched with multiple kills, his blue skin marked with traditional clan markings. His eyes locked on Ethan with immediate hostility, then shifted to her splinted ankle with clear contempt. The standoff happened in seconds, weapons rising, stances shifting. The trial's isolation had been broken, and the consequences stood before them armed and angry. Torak emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his movements silent despite the dry leaves underfoot. The Narboy was leaner than LRA, his blue skin marked with recent scars and traditional clan etchings. He carried himself with an aggressive confidence that spoke of successful hunts and solitary endurance. His eyes scanned Ethan with immediate hostility, then dropped to LRA's splinted ankle with clear contempt. He saw contamination where Ethan saw compassion, human interference in sacred tradition. His spear shifted aim from potential predators to the human outsider, the obsidian point steady and leveled at Ethan's chest. The weapon was notched with multiple kills, each mark representing a successful hunt during his trial period. He had been surviving well alone, following traditional methods to the letter. LRA stepped between them, speaking rapid Nar dialect in low, urgent tones. She used formal trial language, invoking ritual protocols and neutrality clauses. Torak listened without lowering his spear, his expression hardening rather than softening. He viewed Ethan's help as cheating, a violation of the trial's fundamental isolation principle. His success had been earned through pure endurance without external aid or compromise. The cultural divide suddenly had 3 sides instead of 2. LRA represented adaptation and acceptance of new methods. Torak embodied strict adherence to tradition and solitary strength. Ethan stood as the outsider whose actions had unintentionally disrupted centuries of ritual practice. The forest around them felt suddenly still, as if holding its breath waiting for the conflict to resolve. Torak had been tracking LRA for 2 days, following the signs of her injury and slowed progress. He'd assumed she would fail like most candidates with significant wounds. Finding her mobile and assisted by an alien broke his understanding of the trial's purpose. His own survival had been pure, uncompromised by outside contact or help. The splints on her ankle represented everything his culture taught against. The twin moons were aligning overhead, their combined light casting double shadows that seemed to watch the standoff. This celestial event signaled the beginning of the trial's most dangerous phase, when rock shadows became more aggressive and the forest itself seemed to turn against the candidates. Traditional lore said the moon's alignment tested true leadership through maximum adversity, separating future chiefs from those who would perish. Torak's spear remained steady, his body tense with the decision to attack or retreat. LRA continued speaking, her words shifting from explanation to warning as she noted the changing light patterns. The alignment period demanded focus on survival, not internal conflicts, but the presence of an outsider complicated everything, introducing variables never accounted for in their traditions. Then 5 figures materialized among the trees, their arrival silent and sudden. The Nar elders wore ornate weapons and ceremonial marks that denoted high status and authority. Their eyes took in the scene immediately, the human, the splinted candidate, the armed boy with his spear aimed at the outsider. Accusations began before they'd fully emerged from the forest shadows, their voices sharp with ritual anger and disbelief. The eldest examined LRA's splint work with narrowed eyes, his fingers tracing the weaving pattern without touching the injury. He spoke of legends then, of prophecies that suddenly seemed relevant to the situation. The twin moons were aligning for the third time since Ethan's crash, a timing that matched certain ancient predictions. Their words carried weight beyond immediate judgment, suggesting this confrontation might be about destiny rather than violation. Then the seer stepped forward from among the elders, her eyes seeming to see through all of them at once. She carried no weapons, only a staff carved with celestial patterns that caught the double moonlight. Her voice, when she spoke, seemed to come from the stones themselves, low and resonant with meaning. The true test was beginning, and none of them were ready for what it would reveal. 5 Nar elders appeared silently among the trees, their arrival so sudden they seemed to materialize from the shadows. Their ornate weapons showed ceremonial carvings alongside practical wear, the marks on their blue skin denoting high status and authority. They moved with the quiet confidence of those who knew the forest held no threats for them. Their eyes immediately assessed the scene: the human outsider, the splinted candidate, the armed boy with his spear still raised. Accusations began before formal greetings, their voices sharp with ritual anger. They condemned Ethan for corrupting their sacred trial, their words precise and heavy with tradition. The isolation principle formed the foundation of their leadership selection, and his interference represented the worst kind of violation. They spoke of contamination, of weakened bloodlines, of traditions broken by outsider meddling. Their condemnation felt absolute, final, as rooted in their culture as the ancient trees around them. LRA and Torak both tried to explain, their stories overlapping and conflicting in ways that heightened rather than eased tensions. LRA spoke of practical help, of survival techniques that enhanced rather than replaced traditional strength. Torak emphasized violation, the unfair advantage given to a candidate who should have failed due to injury. Their conflicting perspectives revealed the divide already growing within their generation, between adaptation and purity, innovation and tradition. The eldest elder examined Ethan's splint work on LRA's ankle with narrowed eyes. His fingers traced the weaving pattern without touching the injury, assessing the technique with clinical detachment. The precision of the work, the obvious effectiveness of the treatment seemed to conflict with his expectations of crude outsider methods. He studied the way the fibers immobilized the joint without restricting circulation, the careful tension that supported without constricting. He spoke then of legends, of prophecies that suddenly seemed relevant to this unexpected encounter. His voice carried the weight of generations, of oral histories passed down through countless alignments of the twin moons. The timing of events held particular significance in their culture, and the current celestial alignment marked the third such event since Ethan's crash. The coincidence felt too precise to ignore, too patterned to dismiss as random chance. Their words carried weight beyond immediate judgment, suggesting this confrontation might be about destiny rather than simple violation. The elders' anger seemed to shift into something more complex, more measured. They spoke of cycles and patterns, of predictions made centuries earlier that only now seemed to find their meaning. The forest itself felt like it was listening, the usual sounds of predators and prey falling silent around them. The twin moons aligned directly overhead, their combined light casting the clearing in eerie double shadows. This celestial event occurred only once every 3 years, marking the trial's most dangerous phase and its ceremonial culmination. The timing of Ethan's arrival, his survival through 3 such alignments, and his intervention during this specific cycle all suggested connections deeper than accident. The elders watched him with new assessment, their weapons lowering slightly as calculations replaced condemnation. Then the seer stepped forward from among the elders, her presence changing the energy of the clearing immediately. She carried no weapons, only a staff carved with celestial patterns that seemed to catch and hold the double moonlight. Her eyes saw through all of them at once, seeing past the immediate conflict to deeper patterns and possibilities. Her voice, when she spoke, seemed to come from the stones themselves, low and resonant with meaning that transcended the moment. The true test was beginning, and none of them were ready for what it would reveal about their future. The seer's voice seemed to come from the stones themselves, low and resonant like the deep hum of the planet's core. She stood with the double moonlight catching the celestial carvings on her staff, her eyes seeing beyond the immediate confrontation to deeper patterns. The elders fell silent around her, their accusations fading into respectful attention. The forest itself seemed to listen, the usual night sounds pausing as if in anticipation. She recited words centuries old, passed down through generations of seers who had guarded their meaning without full understanding. The prophecy had been considered mostly symbolic, a poetic fragment from a time when their people feared celestial events. Now the words took on concrete meaning, each syllable heavy with sudden relevance. The elders watched her with a mix of reverence and apprehension, their ceremonial weapons half lowered in confusion. The prophecy spoke of a sky-fallen stranger bringing new knowledge during the third alignment. "When the twin moons align for the third time," she intoned, her voice carrying through the clearing, "a stranger from beyond the sky will bring new knowledge." The words hung in the air, their simple statement seeming to rewrite reality around them. The timing matched exactly. Ethan's crash 3 alignments past, his survival through the cycles, his intervention during this specific celestial event. Ethan's human techniques weren't contamination, but foretold change. The splint work on LRA's ankle, the shared survival methods, the adaptive strategies, all represented the new knowledge promised in the ancient words. The elders' anger shifted to measured assessment, their eyes recalculating the outsider's presence not as violation, but as potential fulfillment. The cultural disruption suddenly appeared intentional, destined, part of a pattern larger than any individual's actions. The trial wasn't ruined, but transformed into something new and dangerous. Where tradition demanded solitary endurance, the prophecy suggested collaborative adaptation. Where isolation tested individual strength, the change trial would test collective wisdom. The very foundation of NAR leadership selection shifted in that moment, the ancient words overriding centuries of practice. The forest seemed to acknowledge the change, the wind shifting to carry new scents and sounds. 4 candidates would now face the Shadowlands together, not as individuals competing for leadership, but as a team blending different strengths: LRA's adaptability, Torak's traditional prowess, along with 2 others who had survived thus far, Vena's cunning and Kruvel's healing knowledge. Their combined approach would face the deadliest phase of the trial, testing whether collaboration could surpass solitary endurance. The rock shadows in the Shadowlands cared nothing for tradition, only effectiveness against prey. Traditional strength would be tested against adaptive collaboration. The prophecy didn't discard the old ways but challenged them to evolve, to incorporate new perspectives while retaining core values. The seer's declaration carried the weight of divine guidance, her interpretation backed by celestial timing and exact correspondence with the ancient text. The elders accepted her reading without question, their posture shifting from accusatory to contemplative. Ethan found himself not accused but appointed. The sky-fallen stranger had a role now, a purpose beyond mere survival. His 3 years of adaptation and learning became valuable knowledge rather than outsider contamination. The forest he had struggled against alone suddenly became a classroom where 2 species could teach each other. The appointment felt heavier than any survival burden he had carried. Now others would live or die based on his guidance. The seer looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold both past and future. Her staff pointed toward the Shadowlands where the 4 candidates would face their transformed trial. The double moonlight made the carved celestial pattern seem to move, tracing paths of possibility across the dark wood. The true test was beginning, and for the first time in 3 years, Ethan wouldn't be facing it alone. Leadership would never be the same after that night under the twin moons. The chief's announcement echoed through the clearing, his voice carrying the weight of broken tradition. For the first time in NAR history, 4 candidates would lead together rather than one surviving alone. The decision felt radical, dangerous, almost heretical to the elders who had spent lifetimes upholding the old ways. Their ceremonial marks seemed to darken with disapproval as the words settled over the gathering. The Council of 4 represented complementary strengths rather than solitary perfection. LRA brought vision and willingness to learn from outside perspectives, her mind already adapting to human concepts of cooperation. Torak embodied raw strength and unwavering commitment to traditional warrior ways, his notched spear Jungming of his solo survival skills. Fina moved with the cunning of a predator, her adaptation skills sharpened through 3 days of outsmarting rock shadows. Kruvel carried wisdom beyond his years, his knowledge of healing herbs and anatomy making him the group's medic. Their survival would depend on blending these diverse approaches into a functional unit. The rock shadows cared nothing for tradition or prophecy. They hunted based on effectiveness, on vulnerability, on the simple calculus of predator and prey. Their coordinated attacks in the Shadowlands had ended countless solo candidates throughout Nar history. The elders knew this better than anyone. They had all survived the trial themselves, though many of their childhood companions had not. The four leaders would face pack tactics that demanded coordinated defense, something never before attempted in the trial's history. Rescuing one child had set this transformation in motion, because it introduced an outside variable their system couldn't ignore. Ethan's intervention had been small. Some water shared, a splint applied, some survival tips exchanged. But it had demonstrated that adaptation could enhance rather than weaken traditional strength. The prophecy provided the framework, but the practical evidence made it undeniable. LRA's improved mobility, her retained fighting capability despite injury, showed the elders what might be possible if they evolved their methods. They entered the Shadowlands as a team rather than competitors, their movements already falling into natural roles. Torak took point, his traditional weapons ready and his senses tuned to familiar threats. LRA watched the canopy and higher ground, her perspective widened by Ethan's human strategies. Fina scanned for ambush points and alternative routes, her cunning eyes missing nothing. Kruval kept position in the center, his medical pack accessible and his knowledge of terrain hazards guiding their path selection. The forest changed as they moved deeper into the Shadowlands. The blue-green canopy thickened until only fragments of double moonlight reached the ground. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of damp stone and something else, the sharp metallic odor that signaled rock shadow activity. The usual forest sounds fell away, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow all noise. Their footsteps became whisper quiet, their breathing controlled, their communication reduced to hand signals and eye contact. Ethan moved slightly apart from the group, close enough to advise but not direct. His role was guide rather than leader, his human perspective available but not imposed. He watched them adapt to each other in real time, their individual strengths beginning to weave together into something new. Torak's aggressive stance softened as he recognized Vena's superior ambush detection. LRA's innovative ideas gained traction when paired with Kruvel's practical knowledge. The transformation happened through necessity rather than theory, forged by immediate threat rather than philosophical agreement. The rock shadows found them near a granite outcrop, their clicking communication echoing through the stone. 6 of them moved in coordinated patterns, flanking maneuvers that had proven deadly to solo warriors. The 4 candidates reacted not as individuals but as a unit, their blended approach creating defenses the predators had never encountered. Traditional strength met adaptive strategy, and for the first time in Shadowlands history, the hunters became the hunted. The air grew colder where light rarely reached, the twin moons offering only faint illumination through the thickened canopy. Shadows moved with purpose here, shifting in ways that suggested more than wind or wildlife. The 4 candidates moved with Ethan guiding their strategies from a slight distance, his low-voiced suggestions carrying through the oppressive silence. Their formation had tightened since entering the Shadowlands, each member covering specific sightlines and vulnerabilities. The usual forest sounds had vanished, replaced by a stillness that felt like anticipation. Rock shadows hunted in packs here, drawn by movement and body heat rather than chance encounters. Their coordinated tactics had evolved to counter solo warriors, using flanking maneuvers and vibration-based communication to isolate and overwhelm. Ethan showed them elevated shelter building, using the dense canopy as natural protection. They wove platforms between flexwood branches, creating observation points that kept them above the predator's preferred hunting grounds. The structures blended into the forest so completely they became nearly invisible until needed. They created smarter fire techniques that concealed rather than revealed their position. Instead of traditional ground fires that cast light and scent for kilometers, Ethan demonstrated how to use insulated stone containers that contained heat while minimizing visible flame. The method required more preparation but offered security the Nar had never considered. They could cook food, purify water, and maintain body warmth without advertising their location to every predator in the territory. The technique felt like revelation to candidates accustomed to either freezing or risking attack. Traditional Nar combat methods proved insufficient against coordinated attacks. Torak's aggressive solo tactics nearly got him isolated twice. his reliance on individual strength leaving openings the pack hunters exploited. Vina's cunning worked better for evasion than direct confrontation, while Cruvell's medical knowledge meant nothing against overwhelming force. LRA's adapted techniques showed promise, but lacked the cohesion needed for group defense. Their individual skills remained impressive but disconnected, like separate tools without a unified purpose. Pride nearly got them killed during the first real attack. Torak refused retreat against 3 advancing rock shadows, his tradition demanding stand-and-fight responses. Vina attempted to flank alone rather than coordinating with others. Cruvell focused on treating a minor injury instead of maintaining defensive awareness. Only when LRA shouted a unified fallback command, using human tactical terms Ethan had taught her, did they disengage effectively. The lesson cost them supplies abandoned during retreat and a deep gash on Torak's arm that required immediate attention. The trial became less about individual strength and more about collective survival. They developed hand signals for silent communication, assigned rotating watch schedules that maximized alertness, and created fallback positions that protected all members equally. Torak's strength became the group's spear point rather than solo advantage. Vina's cunning directed their route selection and ambush avoidance. Cruvell's medical knowledge kept them functional despite injuries. LRA's adaptability helped blend their diverse approaches into something cohesive. They survived through blended strategies that confused the predators. Rock Shadows expected either solo fighters or predictable group movements. The 4 leaders presented something entirely new: coordinated defense that used traditional NAR weapons with human tactical concepts. The predators retreated from confrontations that offered no clear advantage, their pack hunting strategies failing against unified resistance. Each successful defense reinforced their collaboration, turning theory into practical survival. Then the largest attack came at dawn on the 3rd day. 8 rock shadows moved in coordinated patterns unlike anything recorded in NAR history. They used the terrain itself as weapon, triggering rockfalls to limit movement and herding the candidates toward granite walls that amplified vibration sensing. The assault demonstrated intelligence beyond normal predator behavior, suggesting adaptation to the new threats the group represented. Their usual tactics wouldn't work against such numbers and coordination. Everything they had learned faced its ultimate test as the circle tightened around them. 6 rock shadows moved in coordinated patterns around the granite outcrop, their armored legs clicking against stone with precise rhythm. The creatures had learned from previous encounters with NAR warriors, adapting their pack tactics to counter traditional defensive formations. They used the terrain strategically, positioning 3 on higher ground while 3 others flanked from the shadows below. Their movements showed intelligence beyond simple predation, suggesting generations of evolutionary adaptation to NAR hunting methods. Traditional defensive formations were failing against these adapted tactics. The rock shadows anticipated the standard NAR response: tight circles with spears outward, aggressive countercharges against apparent weak points. They used vibration communication to coordinate feints and diversions, testing the group's cohesion and reaction times. Torak's initial aggressive stance nearly broke their formation when 3 shadows simultaneously attacked his position, their claws scraping against his armor with enough force to stagger him. Ethan shouted instructions based on human military strategies, his voice cutting through the chaos with calm precision. He called for staggered retreat patterns that maintained defensive coverage while creating distance, suggested using the predator's vibration sensing against them, by having 2 members create diversionary impacts, while others repositioned. His concepts felt foreign to NAR warriors accustomed to stand-and-fight traditions, but the effectiveness became immediately apparent as the rock shadows hesitated against the unfamiliar tactics. LRA organized the retreat while maintaining visual contact with all members. She used hand signals Ethan had taught her to direct movements without shouting over the combat noise. Her position allowed her to see the overall battle pattern, spotting where the rock shadows were attempting to isolate individual fighters. She coordinated fallback points that utilized natural choke points in the terrain, turning defensive withdrawal into tactical advantage. Torak created diversions using traditional NAR hunting calls that usually attracted rather than repelled predators. His deep-throated challenges drew 3 rock shadows toward his position, buying time for the others to regroup. The move risked his own safety, but demonstrated how traditional strength could serve group survival when properly directed. His solo endurance became the group's shield, his traditional skills finding new purpose in collaborative defense. Vina used cunning positioning to create ambush points within their retreat path. She identified overhanging rock formations that could be triggered to fall, narrow passages that limited the predator's numerical advantage, and natural echo points that confused vibration sensing. Her adaptive thinking turned defensive movement into offensive opportunity, using the environment itself as weapon against their attackers. Cruvel tended to minor injuries while maintaining defensive awareness. He applied compression wraps to bleeding wounds, administered pain-numbing herbs that didn't impair mobility, and kept track of each member's physical condition. His medical knowledge became strategic advantage rather than afterthought, maintaining the group's fighting capacity through sustained engagement. The Rock Shadow's attempts to target wounded members failed against his protective techniques. Their blended approach confused the predators, creating openings where none should have existed. The Rock Shadows hesitated against tactics that blended Nar aggression with human strategy, their pack coordination breaking down against unpredictable responses. They retreated from engagements that offered no clear advantage, their clicking communication taking on frustrated patterns. The unfamiliar fighting style left them without effective counter-strategies, their evolutionary adaptations insufficient against this new threat. They emerged from the Shadowlands battered but alive, their bodies marked with cuts and bruises but no critical injuries. The experience had changed them fundamentally, rewriting their understanding of strength and survival. Torak's traditional prowess had saved them multiple times, but only when directed by LRA's adaptive thinking and supported by Vina's cunning and Cruvel's medical skills. The Rock Shadow's retreat represented more than temporary victory. It demonstrated that combined approaches could defeat threats that had overwhelmed solo warriors for generations. Human survival techniques and Nar warrior wisdom combined to create something neither could achieve alone. The Predator's unstoppable reputation shattered against coordinated defense that used traditional strength in new ways. The four leaders had proven that collaboration could enhance rather than weaken individual capabilities, that diverse skills could interlock into superior survival strategies. Their emergence from the Shadowlands marked not just the end of a trial, but the beginning of a new era in Nar leadership. The village watched their battered procession approach through the blue-green twilight. The four candidates moved with the steady pace of survivors rather than victors, their bodies marked with cuts and bruises but their postures straight with purpose. Traditionalists in the crowd expected failure, seeing the group approach as proof of corrupted tradition. Reformers hoped for success, their eyes searching for signs that the new approach had worked against impossible odds. The air felt heavy with unspoken judgments and centuries of unchanged practice. The candidates' shared survival challenged all expectations. They hadn't returned as solitary champions but as a coordinated unit, their movements still synchronized from days in the Shadowlands. Their weapons showed recent use but no broken shafts or lost equipment. Their injuries appeared treated with precision, bandaged in ways that allowed full mobility. The elders watched with guarded expressions, their ceremonial weapons held in neutral positions rather than ready stances. LRA spoke first when they reached the village center, her voice carrying the confidence of proven results. She described how adaptation had saved them all, how human tactical concepts had enhanced rather than replaced Nar strength. She cited specific moments where traditional methods would have failed against coordinated attacks, where blended strategies had created advantages. Her words carried the weight of first-hand experience, of survival earned through innovation rather than dogma. Torak admitted traditional strength needed complementary skills. His statement shocked the traditionalists, coming from the candidate who had most embodied pure warrior values. He described moments where his solo aggression had nearly gotten them killed, where group coordination had achieved what individual prowess could not. His notched spear, once a symbol of solitary achievement, now represented one tool among many in their survival arsenal. The admission cost him visible effort but carried undeniable credibility. Vina explained how cunning worked better with cooperation. She described ambush points that required multiple fighters to spring, diversion tactics that needed coordinated timing, escape routes that depended on mutual support. Her natural adaptability had found greater expression in group strategy than solo survival. She demonstrated with hand signals they developed showing how silent communication had outmaneuvered predators that hunted by sound and vibration. Kruvel showed how healing maintained their fighting capacity. He displayed the medical pack now integrated with his weapons, explaining how prompt treatment of minor injuries had prevented major disabilities. He described assessing terrain for medical safety alongside tactical advantage, considering escape routes that accommodated wounded members. His perspective transformed medicine from afterthought to strategic component, changing how the Nar viewed combat preparation and recovery. The Council of Four wasn't just theory, it had been tested and proven under the most extreme conditions. Their survival against the largest rock shadow attack in memory demonstrated that blended leadership could overcome threats that had slaughtered solo warriors for generations. The evidence stood before the village in the form of 4 living candidates where traditionally, only one would have returned. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge the change, the usual predator sounds remaining curiously absent during their testimony. Ethan stood slightly apart from the proceedings, watching the cultural transformation unfold. The alien's offer hung unspoken but clear in the elder's measuring looks, in the seer's intense focus. He could remain the outsider who had accidentally triggered change, or step into the role fate seemed to have prepared. The choice represented more than personal preference. It meant helping reshape an entire civilization's survival strategies. The seer looked at him with new understanding, her eyes seeing the 3 years of adaptation that had prepared him for this moment. Her staff, carved with celestial patterns that matched the twin moons overhead, seemed to point toward decisions yet unmade. The village waited, the forest waited, the future of 2 species balancing on choices that would rewrite legends and redefine survival. The legends speak of change, but not of departure. The seer's words carried formal ceremonial weight, her staff touching the ground with a sound like stone settling. The twin moons cast her in double shadow, making her seem both ancient and ageless. Her declaration wasn't suggestion but confirmation, an interpretation of prophecy that even the most traditional elders couldn't dispute. The village watched in silence, their weapons lowered but not yet sheathed, their expressions caught between respect for tradition and fear of transformation. Ethan's role had transformed from outsider to essential guide. His 3 years of solitary survival became valuable knowledge rather than contamination. The humans' adapt or perish philosophy had saved their future leaders where traditional methods would have failed. The evidence stood before them, 4 living candidates instead of the customary 1 survivor. Their injuries treated with precision, their weapons intact, their coordination obvious even in stillness. The rock shadow's retreat from coordinated defense spoke louder than any ceremonial argument. The Nar people faced a choice that would define their future. They could cling to tradition, maintaining the solitary trial that had shaped their culture for generations. Or they could embrace evolution, incorporating new strategies while preserving core values. The Council of Four represented a blending of old and new wisdom, Torak's traditional strength, LRA's adaptive thinking, Vena's cunning, and Kruvel's healing knowledge. Their successful return from the Shadowlands proved that combined approaches could defeat threats that had overwhelmed solo warriors for centuries. Ethan's knowledge would help them face future threats more effectively. His human perspective offered strategies for coordinated defense, improved shelter construction, advanced medical treatment, and resource management. These weren't replacements for Nar traditions, but enhancements that built upon existing strengths. The rock shadows and other predators would continue adapting to their hunting methods, requiring continuous evolution in response. Static traditions would eventually fail against evolving threats no matter how deeply cherished. His isolation had ended, replaced by purposeful integration. The 3 years of solitary survival had prepared him for this role, giving him the skills and knowledge needed to guide their transformation. The forest that had been his adversary became a classroom where 2 species could teach each other. His spear would rest beside Nar ceremonial weapons, his shelters become part of their training, his medical techniques integrate with their healing practices. The transition felt natural, inevitable, like a river finding a new course after a rock slide. A human's adapt or perish philosophy shattered their deepest beliefs by proving that strength could take multiple forms. Where Nar tradition valued solitary endurance, human experience showed that collaboration could enhance individual capability. Where their culture prized uncomplaining suffering, His methods demonstrated that preventing injury maintained fighting capacity better than enduring damage. The cultural collision wasn't about right or wrong, but about expanding possibilities, about recognizing that survival required both strength and wisdom, both tradition and innovation. He chose to stay and help write those new legends. The decision felt less like choice and more like recognizing a path already laid out. His 3 years of adaptation had been preparation for this purpose. His accidental intervention the catalyst for needed change. The Nar people wouldn't become human, but they might become something new. A blend of warrior tradition and adaptive strategy that could face future threats with greater resilience. The twin moons would continue their cycles, the rock shadows their hunting, but the rules of survival had changed forever. Leadership became a conversation rather than a command in the months that followed. The 4 leaders brought different perspectives to each challenge, their council meetings stretching long into the double moon nights. They debated hunting strategies, resource allocation, and defense protocols with a diversity of thought previously unknown in Nar society. Decisions emerged from discussion rather than decree, from blended wisdom rather than solitary authority. The change felt uncomfortable at first, like new leather that hadn't been broken in, but the results spoke for themselves. Traditionalists still resisted, fearing loss of warrior identity above all else. They watched from the edges of gatherings, their ceremonial marks standing out like accusations against the changing times. Their whispers spoke of contamination, of weakened bloodlines, of traditions eroded by outsider influence. They remembered generations of solitary warriors who had earned leadership through pure endurance, and the new ways felt like dilution of that hard-won legacy. Their resistance simmered beneath the surface of every decision, a constant tension that threatened to undo the progress. But improved survival rates and successful hunts proved the value beyond argument. Hunting parties returned with more meat and fewer injuries. Rock shadow attacks resulted in scratches rather than fatalities. Resource gathering became more efficient with shared knowledge and coordinated efforts. The evidence mounted with each passing moon cycle, slowly eroding even the most stubborn traditionalist arguments. Where rhetoric failed, practical results succeeded, demonstrating that adaptation could enhance rather than weaken their capabilities. Ethan taught while learning, bridging human and Nar knowledge systems. He showed them advanced shelter construction that blended flexwood with stone foundations, demonstrated how to create elevated storage that protected supplies from both weather and predators, explained human concepts of preventive medicine and strategic planning. In return, they taught him deeper forest lore, advanced tracking methods he'd missed during his solitary years, and the subtle language of rock shadow movements. The exchange felt less like teaching and more like mutual discovery, 2 cultures finding common ground through shared necessity. The rock shadows became manageable threats rather than inevitable killers. Coordinated defense strategies transformed the predators from objects of fear into calculated risks. Hunting parties now carried specialized equipment for different scenarios, vibration dampeners for stealth, coordinated noisemakers for diversion, reinforced nets for containment. The creatures still posed danger, but no longer represented certain death for anyone who encountered them. This shift alone justified the cultural changes for many who had lost family members to random attacks. Young Nar now learned both traditional and adaptive survival methods. Training fields echoed with the sounds of both solo combat drills and group coordination exercises. Elders taught ancient warrior techniques, while younger instructors demonstrated blended strategies. The children practiced splint making alongside spear throwing, shelter building alongside solo tracking. The dichotomy created a generation that understood both ways, that could choose the best approach for each situation rather than relying on dogma. The prophecy had fulfilled itself through practical necessity. The skyfallen stranger had indeed brought new knowledge, but not through divine intervention or superior wisdom. The transformation worked because it addressed real survival needs, because it produced measurable improvements in daily life. The celestial timing provided the framework, but the practical benefits drove the acceptance. Change came not because traditions were wrong, but because the world kept evolving and required evolving responses. What forced Ethan to risk his life for alien competitors was the same thing that had sustained him through 3 years of isolation. The understanding that survival sometimes meant connection. His rescue of LRA hadn't been calculated strategy but human instinct. The same instinct that had made him check fallen crewmates even when hope was gone. That moment of compassion had started a chain reaction that transformed a civilization, proving that strength could include empathy, that leadership could embrace diversity, that sometimes the bravest action was to care when every survival instinct said to remain detached. 3 years of isolation had led to this. Connection. The man who had learned to trust nothing but his own hands now guided a community. The outsider who had mastered solitude now helped build collaborative systems. The forest that had been his adversary became his classroom, his home, his purpose. The twin moons continued their cycles, the rock shadows their hunting. But the Nar people faced the future with expanded tools, broader perspectives, and the understanding that true strength often meant knowing when to stand together. Ethan's spear now rested beside Nar ceremonial weapons in the training grounds. The obsidian blade he'd carved during his first year stood among traditional weapons that had served generations. His shelter-building techniques became standard training, taught alongside ancient combat forms. Young warriors learned to weave flexwood structures that blended into the forest, to create elevated platforms that avoided ground predators, to use insulation methods that concealed heat signatures. The knowledge spread through demonstration rather than decree, its adoption driven by practical results. Some still whispered about contamination of pure traditions. Elders who had spent lifetimes upholding the old ways watched from the shadows, their ceremonial marks seeming to darken with disapproval. They spoke of weakened bloodlines, of sacred practices eroded by outsider influence. Their resistance remained quiet but persistent, a constant undercurrent in council meetings and training sessions. The changes felt too rapid, too radical, too driven by celestial coincidence rather than deliberate choice. But the children lived who would have died under the old system. Hunting parties returned with fewer injuries and greater success rates. Rock shadow attacks became manageable incidents rather than fatal encounters. The evidence mounted with each passing moon cycle, slowly silencing even the most stubborn traditionalists. Where rhetoric failed, practical results succeeded. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge the transformation, its dangers becoming challenges rather than certain death. LRA's questions became the village's questions, her curiosity their growth. She asked why they hunted certain patterns, why they built shelters certain ways, why they treated injuries with stoicism rather than prevention. Her inquiries forced examinations of traditions that had gone unquestioned for generations. The Council of Four leaders embraced this questioning spirit, their decisions emerging from discussion rather than decree. Leadership became conversation rather than command, blending diverse perspectives into unified strategies. The Skyfallen One had indeed brought new knowledge as prophesied. His human techniques enhanced rather than replaced Nar traditions, creating something stronger than either approach alone. The coordinated defense strategies, improved medical care, and resource management systems all stemmed from that initial intervention. The prophecy provided the framework, but practical necessity drove the acceptance. Change came because it worked, because it addressed real survival needs in an evolving environment. But he had also received knowledge, understanding a different way of being. His 3 years of isolation had taught him survival. His time with the Nar taught him community. He learned deeper forest lore, advanced tracking methods, and the subtle language of predator movements. The exchange transformed him from solitary survivor to integrated guide, his human perspective becoming one voice among many rather than dominant influence. The transformation went both ways, creating mutual evolution rather than one-sided change. Survival remained the priority, but its definition had expanded. Where once it meant solitary endurance, it now included collaborative strength. Where it demanded uncomplaining suffering, it now embraced preventive care. The core goal remained unchanged, to live another day, to protect the community, to face the forest's threats, but the methods had grown more diverse, more adaptive, more effective. The Nar people faced the same dangers but with expanded tools and broader perspectives. Rescuing one child led to the first multi-leader council because it demonstrated that adaptation could enhance traditional strength. LRA's improved mobility despite injury, her retained fighting capability with proper support, showed what became possible when different approaches combined. The Council of Four represented this blended philosophy, traditional strength working with adaptive thinking, cunning paired with healing knowledge. Their success in the Shadowlands proved that collaborative leadership could overcome threats that had defeated solitary warriors for generations. The twin moons would align again, but the Nar would be ready. Their hunting parties carried specialized equipment for different scenarios. Their training included both solo endurance and group coordination. Their medical knowledge combined traditional herbs with advanced techniques. The rock shadows would continue their hunting, the forest its challenges, but the people faced them with resilience forged through adaptation rather than rigid tradition. The cycles continued, but the participants had evolved. New legends were indeed being written across the Nar territories. The story traveled with traders and hunters, moving from village to village like wind through flexwood leaves. It spread first to neighboring settlements, then to distant tribes who had never seen a human. The tale grew in the telling, acquiring details and variations. But the core remained unchanged: a sky-fallen stranger, a transformed trial, a council of 4 leaders where one had always ruled before. Not all accepted the blended approach, leading to new conflicts that tested the emerging unity. Traditionalist tribes saw the changes as contamination, as weakness masquerading as progress. They sent challenges and condemnations, their messengers carrying carved stones etched with warnings about broken traditions. Some border skirmishes erupted when hunting territories overlapped, each side convinced their way represented true Nar values. The resistance felt organized, deliberate, a cultural immune response against foreign ideas. But the Council of 4 proved adaptable to different challenges. They faced traditionalist opposition with patience rather than aggression, demonstrating their methods through practical results rather than forceful imposition. When border conflicts arose, they sent hunting parties that used coordinated defense to disable rather than kill, proving their strength while minimizing casualties. They adapted their approach for different tribes, emphasizing aspects that resonated with local values while maintaining core principles of collaboration and adaptation. Ethan's human perspective became one voice among many, not dominant. He advised rather than directed, suggested rather than commanded. His role shifted from teacher to consultant, his knowledge integrated into Nar systems rather than imposed upon them. The shelter designs became Nar designs, the medical techniques Nar techniques, the hunting strategies Nar strategies. The transformation felt organic, evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Each adaptation tested and modified to fit their culture. The rock shadows learned to fear coordinated Nar hunting parties. Where once they had hunted solo warriors with predictable tactics, they now faced groups that used vibration confusion, elevated attacks, and strategic retreats. The predators' success rates dropped sharply, their pack strategies failing against coordinated defense. They began avoiding areas with recent human Nar activity, their evolutionary adaptations not yet prepared for this new type of opposition. The forest's balance shifted gradually but permanently. Survival rates improved, population grew, knowledge expanded. Fewer hunters died in rock shadow attacks. More children reached adulthood. Elderly members lived longer with improved medical care. The population increase created new challenges: expanded hunting territories, larger settlements, more complex social structures, but these were problems of growth rather than decline. Knowledge accumulated faster through shared learning and written records, each generation building upon the last rather than rediscovering what had been lost. The harsh trial remained, but now included teamwork components. Young candidates still faced the forest alone for the initial phase, testing their individual endurance and survival skills. But the final stage became collaborative, requiring coordination with other candidates to face simulated rock shadow attacks and complex survival scenarios. The change preserved traditional values of strength and endurance while adding the new emphasis on cooperation and adaptive thinking. The trial evolved to test the full range of skills needed for modern leadership. The seer declared the outsider would guide their next chief because the prophecy spoke of knowledge, not domination. Her celestial reading showed patterns of convergence, of complementary strengths enhancing rather than replacing traditional values. The human's role wasn't to lead but to facilitate, to provide perspectives that expanded their possibilities without erasing their identity. His 3 years of solitary adaptation had given him unique insights into their world. While his human background offered alternative ways of thinking about persistent challenges, from isolation came connection, from survival came growth. The man who had mastered solitude now helped build communities, The people who had valued individual strength now embraced collaborative resilience. The forest continued its cycles, the rock shadows their hunting, but the Nar people faced the future with expanded tools and broader perspectives. The legacy wasn't about one species teaching another, but about two ways of being finding common ground through shared necessity and mutual respect. One act of compassion had rewritten civilization. Ethan's decision to help a child seemed small at the time, almost insignificant against 3 years of survival priorities. He'd broken his own rules for a moment of human connection, acting against every instinct the forest had carved into him. The choice felt irrational, dangerous, potentially fatal, but it opened a door between two worlds that desperately needed each other. His survival rules had been clear. Trust no one. Share nothing. Stay silent, stay hidden, stay alone. These principles had kept him alive when others died. Helping her meant violating every lesson learned through blood and loss. It risked his hard-won safety, his carefully managed resources, his isolation-based existence. The rock shadows didn't care about good intentions, they only recognized vulnerability. But the door opened anyway, swinging both ways. The Nar gained adaptive strategies for changing environmental threats. They learned human concepts of preventive medicine, coordinated defense, resource management. Their hunting success rates improved, injury rates dropped, survival probabilities increased. The knowledge integrated with their traditions rather than replacing them, creating something stronger than either approach alone. The forest's dangers became manageable challenges rather than certain death. Ethan gained community after 3 years of solitude. He found purpose beyond mere survival, a place in something larger than his own continued existence. His human perspective became one voice among many, valued but not dominant. He learned deeper forest lore, advanced tracking methods, and the subtle language of Nar culture. The exchange transformed him from solitary survivor to integrated guide, his isolation replaced by connection. The prophecy wasn't about domination but mutual transformation. The celestial timing provided the framework, but practical necessity drove the acceptance. Change came because it worked, because it addressed real survival needs in an evolving environment. The Nar didn't become human, but they became something new, a blend of warrior tradition and adaptive strategy that faced threats with greater resilience. The rock shadows continued their hunting, but the rules had changed. True survival meant growing together, not just enduring alone. The harsh trial remained, but now included teamwork components. Young candidates still faced the forest solo initially, testing individual endurance, but the final stage became collaborative, requiring coordination to face simulated attacks in complex scenarios. The change preserved traditional values while adding cooperation and adaptive thinking. The trial evolved to test the full range of modern leadership skills. Rescuing one child led to the first multi-leader council because it demonstrated that adaptation could enhance traditional strength. LRA's improved mobility despite injury, her retained fighting capability with proper support, showed what became possible when different approaches combined. The Council of Four represented this blended philosophy: traditional strength working with adaptive thinking, cunning paired with healing knowledge. Their success proved collaborative leadership could overcome threats that defeated solitary warriors for generations. The unthinkable had happened. Empathy became survival strategy. Compassion proved strategically valuable rather than weakness. Connection enhanced resilience rather than creating vulnerability. The man who mastered solitude helped build community. The people who valued individual strength embraced collaborative survival. The forest continued its cycles, the twin moons their alignments, but the participants had evolved. Sometimes the bravest action was to care when every instinct said to remain detached. The Skyfallen one chose to stay. He helped build a better future where human and Nar knowledge intertwined like flexwood fibers. His spear rested beside traditional weapons. His shelters became standard training. His medical techniques saved lives that would have been lost. True survival requires both strength and compassion, the unyielding endurance of the warrior and the adaptive thinking of the strategist. It demands respect for tradition while embracing necessary change. Sometimes the bravest action is to trust when every instinct says to run, to choose connection over isolation, to believe that growth comes through unity rather than solitude.